Welcome to From Stardust to Us, in-depth conversations with thought leaders, artists, and spiritual activists, navigating the challenges of our times with integrity, joy, and purpose. I'm Bernice Marie Daly.
And I'm Linnell Hayden. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate our listeners. You can find us on YouTube, Buzzsprout, or any place where podcasts are found. If you enjoy our conversation, please help us reach more people by subscribing, liking, and commenting. So let's get into this week's conversation. We are happy to have with us Kara Huntermoon. Kara is a hyper-local person doing hands-on ecological and community work in the Southern Willamette Valley region. She teaches permaculture and ancestral skills and runs a worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms education program in her intentional community. Kara is involved in 3 rural community organizing projects: the Small Ruminant Network, the Agrarian Sharing Network, and the Southern Willamette Valley Prescribed Burn Association. All of these are doing hands-on work to skill up the local community to respond to collapse, climate change, and the need to increase ecological functioning for our own survival. Kara, welcome. We're happy to have you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So we talk a lot on our podcast, From Stardust to Us, about community. There's a real hunger for it. There's a real need for it. I think a lot of, in our modern world, there's a feeling of separation and loneliness. And you seem to not just work in physical community, but you're also very connected to your ancestors, to the land, to what you refer to as more than human beings that you share the land with. And I'm wondering, how is it that you got to this place in your life? Was there something in your childhood or someone in your childhood that brought you to a place where you are now living with such intention and community-focused life?
Yes, my mother's family lived in the Eugene area for 5 generations before me, and mostly were working class mechanics, farmers, secretaries. And then my dad's family homesteaded in Alaska in the 1920s. So my parents both left the land. My dad grew up hunting moose and flying bush planes. And my parents both left the land. My dad went to college and they raised us to have a better life. They raised us in the suburbs with really good schools in the biggest city in Oregon. And in spite of that city upbringing, they still had a strong connection to the land themselves. My mother liked to take me to do you pick strawberries, to go ride horses on the beach. And my dad had a good job with long vacation times, and he would take us for 2 weeks every summer camping in a place where we saw no other humans. And then for 2 weeks to Alaska to visit my grandparents and pick wild blueberries. And so I had a really nature-based vacation style in my upbringing. And I remember being about 12 or 13 on one of those camping trips, sitting in a cave on the shore of a lake and just reading a book, and a little chipmunk coming into the cave, interacting with me. And I think probably the same camping trip, sitting in camp, reading a book, just being alone while my family was out hiking, and the deer walking into camp to interact with me. And I had a profound experience of being one species among many species, and the spiritual reality that underlies all of our material reality. And that was when I started looking for, like, who's God? Who's God? Where's God? God is obviously in nature, but who's God? That came to me first through experience, and then I started looking for a spiritual practice and a spiritual practice and a practical way to actually manifest my spiritual beliefs in my life.
Mm. Do you have a spiritual practice? It seems to me that you almost live your life in a very spiritual way, very connected.
I think that's true.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I consider myself Wiccan or pagan, and it's
Mhm.
very much like all of material reality that is nature is also the goddess or god, and then my specific tradition is reclaiming, which was founded by Starhawk, and
Mhm.
Starhawk is like, we worship the earth, so we better also protect the earth, and so it's a very activist based religion, and
Right.
and it's interesting. I met Starhawk in my late teens and studied with
Mhm.
her, and then I became a mother when I was 23, and I very much became a solitary practitioner at that point, focused on my kids.
Uh,
Um, and then years later, when I met Starhawk again, both she and I were teaching permaculture. So it was like the the spiritual foundation leads in that direction. Like, how do
right.
you do things to help the earth? Permaculture is one answer.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. What a wonderful story. And of course, uh, some of us are old enough to remember Starhawk. I met her, I was a little older than 18, but a profound and wonderful leader
Hmm.
in those decades that has massive impact on our consciousness and growth and worship, really. That's fabulous. One of the things that I became initially curious about you, if I may ask, and maybe you sort of hinted at it already in your encounter when you were in camp and these animals came to visit you. Um, you have a practice or had a practice of some kind of using pronouns in relation to animals. Um, and I'm curious about how that developed, what it still is, or how you see it as important. Can you share something about that? I think it struck me at the time about how we use words like it, so forth. So, can you say something about that?
Yeah. So this idea comes from Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she wrote an article called "Nature Needs a New Pronoun." It's
Right.
in Yes Magazine. You can see it online. And she says that in the Anishinaabe language, they don't use an objective way of talking about animals, plants, even waters and rocks. They wouldn't call them it, the equivalent of it. It would be like calling your grandmother it. And it's not respectful, and it's not the way they see the world. The way they see the world is that these are alive beings with spirit and agency, and that we're relatives. And so calling them it is very rude
Mm,
and
mm,
unrealistic. Really, it doesn't reflect the way they see the world. And this really struck me as true for me as well. This is not the way I see the world. That the rock is inanimate and has no function on in a community of life, for example, right?
right.
Um, yeah. So I was inspired by her, and she recommends ki and kin as pronouns that recognize our kinship.
Hmm.
And the way she says it is that ki would be a singular pronoun and kin would be a plural pronoun. But what I noticed when I was trying to do this in my life was that models after the it and they grammatical structure. And I didn't want to
Uh-huh.
do that. When we talk about humans, we say he, she, her, right? It's like there's more pronouns in there. So I
Right, right.
I started saying ki, kin, kins, and then they for plural. So yeah, my community, I'd say about a third of the people that I live with try to use he, kin pronouns, and
Do
it's
It's
you
become natural to you. It's just now just part of your vocabulary and way of expression.
yeah, I mean, it's still a little awkward, but I'm very consistent about it in my writing when I write handouts for my classes, and I give all of my students Robin Wall Kimmerer's article and then my article that says this is how we're using this, and then
Right,
when they encounter it in my writing, they're not like, "What's this weird word?"
right, 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 right. And it demonstrates a really pretty significant and foundational shift of consciousness, of relationality, of being, as you say, relatives, all relatives, um, and reflecting that in our language, and there's a lot of language work being done and have been done in recent decades, and work being done now in terms of identity and trying to create language to express our deeper experience. Uh, and of course, in this whole relationship to the natural world, how to do that in a way that reflects that. I found that such a striking example, and I want to tell you, I appreciate your doing that. And I appreciate that being continued to be brought forth. I think it's a very important. Yes, it can be cumbersome, and the changing language is not easy in that sense, and anything can sort of feel odd or whatever. But it's so important underneath that oddness. It's important to kind of walk there. So I just want to appreciate that, and thank you for sharing that.
I have noticed that it changes my mind.
Mm,
Um, for one thing, plants often don't have biological sex in the same way that humans do. Like an apple tree makes both male and female gametes. So if you're going to talk about an apple tree and recognize that he is alive, it's not accurate to say she or he. And so as I've been trying to reflect reality with my language, the reality of not being a sexed being, but still being alive.
right.
And then also the reality as I see it, that these are living beings with spirits that are my kin. I'm trying to reflect that reality in my language. I notice that I start to question more, why does English require us to talk about our biological sex every time we talk about a human? Like there's some situations in which our sex is important and other situations in which it's not important. And I see a lot of people today saying, my sex is not important. Don't talk about my sex. Use they, them pronouns. And so I just get curious about the ways that our language's tendency to say, whenever we talk about you, your sex is important, kind of goes along with other systems that maybe treat us in ways that are not human or not respectful related to our biological sex. And so, yeah, I think he, can pronouns is also a good way to get around that, because you're not talking about someone's sex, you're talking about your kinship, your relatedness.
Right, right. That's fascinating, Kara, I have to say, because I've been doing a little work around gender and language and so forth, and um, it occurred to me that statement of the obvious, um, and certainly in the dominant culture, the first thing we say about a newborn child, and even now before they're born, but even so, the first thing we say about them is to identify them as male or female. And well, there's a whole lot one could say about that. We could have a long conversation about that. But my question was, why? I mean, why do we need to do that? Because what I hear you saying, and it's so foundational. It's so much a part of our assumptions based on what? Oh, I mean, that's a fascinating conversation. We may have to come back just for that conversation. It's really, really struck me as an assumption that I hadn't really, said. Why is that the assumption, the first primary assumption we need to make about a child? Anyway, so thank you for that as well.
Yeah, my first child, I met my child before knowing her sex. She was female, but when she was born, I bonded with her for about an hour before looking, and I hadn't
Yeah,
had any scans or anything. That was really,
right.
I wanted to do it with the second one, but my best friend was in the room and she was so excited that she was a girl that she was like, it's I was like, oh, thanks.
Yep, yep, yep.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
fascinating to bond with your child before, you allow yourself to see, or, if male or female, just
Yeah.
a being, another, what I love about, I remember when it used to be used much more commonly with babies, even,
Yeah.
I mean, that was when I was much younger. And we certainly have used it with animals and certainly with plant life. And what I love about the he, kin pronouns is it doesn't distinguish sex. It's more life, animation, spirit, and that you would use it, I guess. So if you're speaking about an animal and it's obvious, there's some birds and whatnot where you can tell if it's male or female, would you still use the he, kin? Or because what I did many years ago, I started referring to animals with the she, he pronouns. And when you can't tell, which is often, I would just, you just choose one, right? You just guess, because I thought that was better than just saying it.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
Sometimes I'll say she, especially with my domestic animals. Like I know all my hens are female and I know all my
Right.
animals are female.
Sure.
I mean, because ki is a new way of talking, it's sometimes hard for other humans listening to connect with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so she, especially when they're known to be female on the farm, it's easier for my students, to hear she and to feel like a connection with what I'm saying. Yeah, I'll just say one more thing about he, kin pronouns, because I'm a farmer, right? And I do a lot of rural community organizing. So I hang out with a lot of farmers. And I try to make connections with people who are politically different than me. It occurred to me a long time ago that there are ways that I'm more similar to my Trump supporting neighbors than I am to the politically similar people who live in a city and will come out for a farm tour and say, I don't want to see the animals you're going to eat because I'm a vegetarian, or whatever their rigidity is around the realities of farm life. It's been a little strange for me to transition from politically far left city life to living in the country to manifest my beliefs. So I'm making these connections with people who don't see the world the same way I do. And one thing I like about he, kin pronouns is I understand from listening to my rural neighbors that a lot of the movement in cities right now for people to have identity-based pronouns is really hard for them because they're asked to say something they don't see. So if someone says, my pronouns are he, him, and my neighbor sees a female, my neighbor's going to feel like they're being gaslit. Like, why are you asking me to say something that's not real? And the thing about he, kin pronouns is nobody's asking me to use them. I'm using them because they reflect reality as I see it. So it's a very different foundation for why we would be using alternative pronouns. Not because someone asks us to call them something, but because this is how we see the world, and we're using self-discipline to describe the world the way we see it.
Yeah. That's a good point about the gaslighting. Maybe some people feel gaslit to use terms that they don't actually see in the world. So this brings me to, this sort of ties into your work with decolonizing our language, our lives. I think a lot of times the way we've been colonized is to strip the spirituality and the life from the earth so that we can better use it as a resource, and the animals. So I wanted to touch a little bit on that, your work with decolonizing your language and your life, and what does that look like in your community? How do you go about doing that? How do you see that we have been colonized? Maybe I'm understanding it differently than you might. I sometimes, this is something I've been thinking about. Let me just ask you, because you seem very connected to the land and ancestors and whatnot. But we talk a lot about how we're a nation of immigrants. And I've been wondering to myself if that's actually true. are we not still living in the culture of the colonials that came? The Native Americans, we have not integrated into their way of life, into the way they see the world, with, where they would use something like the Kikin pronouns, where they do see the material, what we would think of as the material world, mere resources as spirit, as living beings, rivers, rocks, trees, animals. So are we really immigrants, or are we still colonizers? Other than obviously the descendants of the slaves that were brought over, of course, that's different for them. But I'm kind of meandering here, but am I making sense at all? How do you see that?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of Indigenous leaders saying assimilate. You're not going back to Europe, you're not going back to Africa, so assimilate.
Mm-hmm.
And the tricky thing is we can't go back in time, and the land use is so different now than it used to be. The Kalapuya people where I live, they managed the land by watershed. So they would, from the top of the hills down to the bottom of the valleys, they recognized a watershed as having natural boundaries and needing to be managed as one piece of land. And then they also had territories that moved outside of some of the watersheds and interacted with other watersheds. And they didn't think that people could own land. Now, this is not unique to the Americas. My Irish ancestors also didn't think that people could own land. They lived on land, they belonged on the land, and they managed the commons in a way that, I'm oversimplifying a little bit for the purposes of this conversation, but they would divide the garden plots and reallocate them every year. So no family got the same plot each year because some plots were better than others. And it wasn't right if some families got the better plots over and over and some families got the worst plots over and over. And then they would have family rights to certain aspects of using the commons. So one family would have the right to graze their sheep and they would provide the meat and the wool to the community. And then one family would have the right to harvest the firewood and they would coppice and manage the firewood stands and provide firewood to the community. And one family would have the right to harvest the basket willows and they would make the baskets and provide the baskets to the community. And then there were areas that you just didn't use because they were for the fairies. Like this whole belonging on the land and finding ways to use it so that everyone benefits, but nobody owns it is ancestral. I believe if you go back in any of our family lineages, you'll find stories like this if you go back far enough.
Yes.
The land did not belong to us, we belong to the land.
Right, absolutely.
So starting where we are now, where we live under a system where the land has a title and somebody owns the title, and then there's a boundary and there's a fence on the boundary. It's like, okay, I can do things on 33 acres, but then my neighbor thinks it's a really great idea to till the fields and blow all the topsoil away and try to flatten it out. And he doesn't even charge his farmer for that. He just wants the land to be taken care of. And I'm not going to have that argument with him about how he's damaging and not taking care of the land. Like, how do we get past that piece where this is the system we live under now, and we have the right to do or to not do? And if we change that, then who's going to have the right to do? Is it going to be the people who will do right by the land? There's this whole transition period that I think about, like, how do we decolonize? And part of the answer is learning from the Native people what their priorities are for the land as it is now, and seeing if you can help make those priorities happen. That's part of what I'm doing with the Prescribed Burn Association. And then part of that is learning from our own ancestors, because we're not going to become Native Americans. Like, those of us who are not Indigenous heritage, assimilation does not mean that we become Native Americans. It means we become people whose ancestors were first from somewhere else, who migrated here, and now we're trying to learn to live here the way the land needs us to live here. And people from the beginning of time have shared technologies with each other. It's part of why we're so adaptive. So it might be that the Kalapuya, for example, didn't really make baskets out of willows, but I come with my ancestors from Ireland and I bring really cool basket varieties of willows that originated in Ireland that make really great baskets. And I grow a willow coppice on these 33 acres, right? Like I'm bringing technology from my ancestors to this place to help us have the resources to survive this transition that we're having to go through now. I think we're in late stage capitalism. I think it's ending. And
Right.
so the resources we've been living off of are being depleted. Meanwhile, the resources people lived off of before capitalism have been depleted. So how do we increase the resources in our land base and in our communities, in ourselves with skills, in our descendants with skills and knowledge of the land? How do we increase those resources so that when we need them, we don't have this huge lag time with a lot of terrible suffering? I mean, I don't know if we can prevent that, honestly, but I'm working at it.
Beautiful answer. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm also very struck by something you said earlier, so to go back a minute. My parents wanted me to have, quote, a better life.
Yeah.
And that meant being further from the land. I don't want to make sweeping statements, but this is sort of what I heard.
Yeah.
Or that was the assumption that would be, quote, better, being in the city and so forth. I grew up in Queens, New York. I have nothing against that. But and then you said, but nonetheless, such and such happened for me because of this and this and this and this in my life and my story and my family, and currently the background of your family as well was very it is very land connected. And then I am surprised, you said, I think, that I find myself sort of leaning a little bit in a understanding of a political position that I would not have imagined I would have been attracted to or maybe understanding. And so, what is the relationship between those two things? What does that land have to do? Or the connection to the natural world, or the not city thing? Because we hear it a lot in the media thing over the numbers of years. Well, the supposedly elite in the city and whatever all that is, and the folk and the sort of down the road. It feels like a false dichotomy to me, but nonetheless, there is something there. There is a
Right.
nerve there. Can you
Yeah.
open that a little bit?
Yeah. And it's a little tricky to talk about because I think it's really easy to misunderstand me. I live on land. I butcher animals. I breed
Right.
animals, and when my cow is down on her side in the field and she's 2,000 pounds and I need to get her up or she'll die because she can't breathe in that position, I call my neighbor, and he's 80 and he's been on land. His family's the original homesteaders from the 1890s in this valley. So he's been on land forever. And he comes over with a rope and says, "Oh, I don't know why you called me. I don't know what to do about this cow. I don't know. I guess if it was me, I would just do this." And he ties the rope into a really fancy thing that goes over her head and neck without choking her and pulls her up. Right?
Pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing.
So, I'm well educated. I'm articulate. I love to write, and I'm politically far left.
Hmm?
So I'm learning to connect with him the way he talks and what he does. And I'm learning to recognize his experience and wisdom and this other way of knowing that I was not taught in school, that you learn from actually doing things with your hands on the land. And it comes along sometimes with this kind of inarticulate, "I don't know why you call me. Why do you think I know something?" kind of attitude.
Right.
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 And then, something I've noticed I teach farm workers, right? So I teach people who often are coming from the city to come learn how to live on land. And something I noticed is that sometimes there's an attitude towards rural people, especially rural working class people,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not smart.
Right. Right.
I once did a crossword puzzle in a mainstream newspaper that had 6 different answers that were slurs for white rural people, like hick and hayseed and redneck. I could go on, but I was doing this
Right.
puzzle and
Right.
I was like, you could not get away with doing this with any other identity group. It's okay to do it with white farmers, like there's a reason why there's a rural urban divide. And
Right. Right.
there's
That's what we're talking about here. That's
and
what we're talking about.
yes, and there's strengths to both ways of living, but there's also weaknesses. And if we can't acknowledge our weaknesses, how are we going to get through this? So people who live in the city have the opportunity to meet lots of different people who are different from them and form relationships across identity groups. It's easier to be hypersocial, to go out and meet strangers, to fail at relationships and then replace them with new people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this kind of like melting pot vibe that can happen in a city where you're all kind of starting from the same place. You want to get a job, you want to have housing in a safe neighborhood, you'd like your kids to get a good education and maybe have a park to play in, right? Like there's kind of similar goals no matter who you are. And then you come out to the countryside, and the people in the countryside know how to live on land. We're observing things that are real that you don't get to see in the city.
Exactly.
Climate change is not even a question. Duh, it's affecting my garden. Right?
Right.
And if something happens, you're not going to call the authorities, you're going to call your neighbor. So we have to figure out how to get along with people who don't agree with us politically, who just happen to live next door. And we have this opportunity to notice that they're good people, right? I think in the city, you can choose people who agree with you. And in the country, you have to get along even if you don't agree, because you happen to buy land next to each other, right? So I think there's this way that I'll give you a story. One time I taught a butchering class in a small village south of the city that I live nearest to, and I live west of that city. So I drove into the city, went to an organic market to buy myself food, and then drove home. And while I was at the organic market, it's a small locally owned market that is only vegetarian food. And they have a great hot bar. I love having food there. It's yummy. So I was going into this organic market, and standing outside was a man asking people to sign a petition to get a law on the ballot. And the petition it was a vegan activist petition. It would have made it illegal to kill animals in the entire state of Oregon for any reason, including indigenous hunting rights, including mice in your kitchen, including animals for meat. And I stood there and talked to this man, and I tried to have a conversation because I was a vegetarian for 10 years. I was a raw vegan for 6 months, right? I think I have some idea where he's coming from. Starting from an urban context, I was like, I don't like concentrated animal feeding operations. This is horrible. We should not be treating animals this way. I will not participate. I'm a vegetarian now. Okay. So I thought I had some sense of where he might be coming from as an urban person without connection with the land, trying to pass this law. And I tried to talk to him, and he really couldn't listen to me at all. And I finally just said, look, I'm not signing your petition. There's blood on me from killing a goat.
Right. Right.
That's what this is on my pants. I just came from killing a goat. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And of course he was horrified, and I went and bought my food and left. But I think there's this thing that happens with us rural people where we're like, okay, killing animals is a part of life. You can manage land in a way that makes the land healthier. If you do it the right way with animals, it's going to be better. It's going to sequester more carbon. It's going to make more fertility in the soil. The land needs animals. And if you're going to have animals, It's going to make most sense to you if you have products from those animals to help you with your resources. So, okay, if you're a vegetarian, let's say, milk and eggs.
Sure, sure. Right.
So how are you getting milk? You have to
Yeah.
breed the animals. Half the babies are male. What do you do with them?
Mhm.
If you don't kill them and eat them, they harass the females and you have a problem in the social network of the animals. So then what? You're going to give them to someone else to kill them and eat them because you can't face reality and do it yourself? You know, there's this whole thing that it's just like, if you're looking at reality, it leads you in a certain direction. And as rural people, we're looking at people in the city who don't have that reality interface and going, snowflakes. You know, it's like it's an obvious reaction from rural working class people. And and I, and it's unfortunate that it turns into a prejudice that we can't hear each other.
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between the big industrialized farming operations that do a lot of destruction to the environment
Yes.
and do treat the animals horrifically, and these small community-based, farmsteads, and of course, living in the city, you have the option of not eating meat or being vegan. I think there's extremes, I've been in that community for quite a long time and I've seen the extremes. So I know the type of person you're talking about, and it's not realistic. We have to be realistic. I have been vegan for many years because I didn't know what else to do. When I found out about the environment and the animals, and I don't have the knowledge to live off the land, and I just thought, I can't participate in this. So it was exactly that same reaction you were talking about. I cannot do this. I cannot participate. But I realized, this isn't really natural, the natural order, and it's not something that the vast majority of people are ever going to do. They're going to live off the land and live off animals. And if we do that in a way that respects and honors them and the land, doesn't take more than what is needed. And I think, a lot of ways in which you're teaching and living, that's much different than, say, the gigantic industrialized farming and animal agricultural industry that's very destructive. So yeah, these types of petitions and very extreme movements do not make sense, and they don't help at all. They don't help people connect with each other. They don't help. We have to learn to live with our differences, because our neighbors aren't going to be. I have family members that are completely different politically than me. And I'm not going to cut them off. And, they're my family. We have to, and this is just kind of, I think been forever living on this planet. We're not all the same. We're different. We come from different backgrounds. And so that what I'm very interested about your work is that you do this work, community-based, you're realistic, you honor the animals, but you also know that you need them, to live. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about, there was this one on your website I read about this, what's it called, Small Ruminant Network, and how that was a way for you to learn and teach in a community setting a certain set of skills in order to do this project or the animal husbandry. And I thought, well, this would be a great way, because one of the things that a lot of people feel lost, and me too included, is yes, we want community, we want to reconnect with the land, we want to reconnect with each other and in the real physical world, not just scrolling on our phones. But we don't know how to do that. What's the what do I do? Just spoon feed me, and I know And I thought, well, this sounds like something that anybody, whether they want to form a group around, I don't know, it could be anything, gardening, animal husbandry, building houses, whatever, knitting, making clothes for their neighbors, whatever. So maybe you can just sort of walk us through a little bit about how that started and what that is.
I'd love to do that. And I want to introduce this by saying something that you probably won't ask me about, which is about animals. So our ancestors made agreements with the ancestors of our farm animals that they would live together and help each other survive. And we don't know who evolved first, the flower or the bee. And we don't know how humans became dependent on domestic livestock and how the domestic livestock became dependent on humans. But at some point in our histories, we made an agreement that the animals would feed us and we would feed them and we would take care of each other. And if we drop our side of that agreement, they die. It's not just a matter of, in order to survive, we have to have animals. It's a matter of, in order for them to survive, they have to have us. They're no longer wild animals that can just be released into the wild and have a life. And it's happening all over right now because of industrialized agriculture, that the only sheep that are alive are the ones that do well in a heavily industrialized context. And the gene pool of domestic sheep that do well on a homestead, they're going extinct. So we talk a lot about the extinction crisis with wild animals, but there's also an extinction crisis with domestic livestock. And there's a place for small farmers to say, hey, I want this type of sheep that is best on a small farm, that will do best under my management styles, that doesn't need heavy inputs, that is not an industrialized creature. And I'm going to help this rare breed stay alive and help prevent their extinction. And together we'll do this. So that's part of what I like to think about with the animals, that we're doing this together for their survival and ours. And then when you do that, at some point you start killing animals.
Yeah.
So one of the things I just want to insert, I do want to hear you speak more about this, but what came to mind as you were speaking is that has there not been in the history of our species the recognition of that relationship that was celebrated and ritualized as sacred presence and as relationality and as a celebration of life-death cycle upon which we are all interdependent, but a real recognition of honoring of animals. And I'm not, again, I'm not indigenous, original, I'm indigenous somewhere way back, but I am not indigenous in my current life form here. But I think that is part of our psyche, that honoring. And I want to kind of insert that, if I may, in this conversation as you're speaking about the reciprocity of this relationship. And I'd love to hear more, please.
Yeah, I also just want to say the word obligation, which is not a very popular word in modern US culture. Like, I feel an obligation to fulfill these ancestral agreements. And to the extent that I'm able to do it with the resources I have in this lifetime, how do I keep the rare Ancona duck from going extinct? You know, I have an obligation to all life to help things go well. And that's something that I think most humans in most of history have been born into a community where they're strapped with obligations from the beginning. They have obligations to their parents, to their grandparents, to their children, to their extended relatives, to their ecosystem, to their farm animals, whatever it is. You get up in the morning, you take care of the animals before you have breakfast. You know, you have obligations. And there's something about that we've tried to get away from it, but it really helps make us fully human. Because we're not isolated individuals. We're part of, my best friend says, we're part of a tensegrity system. Like, my mind is not a solo mind. My mind works better in connection with other minds, both human minds and more than human minds. And so how do we find our place where we know we belong in a community and we're not just alone here on this planet?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna talk about the small ruminant network. So this group was actually born out of what I would consider signs of collapse. So the last veterinarian that treated sheep and goats in the Eugene area retired. And for 4 years before he retired, anytime I had him out to the farm, he would say, I'm going to retire someday. You're going to have to learn to do this yourself. Let me show you how to give a subcutaneous injection. Let me give you a list of what vaccines and vitamins you need to have on hand for your animals, but he did retire. And one of my friends who has goats called our extension service in a panic and said, what do we do? And our extension service agent, our small farm agent, said, well, you'll have to become your own vets. So get a group together and we'll help you. So our first meeting, we had a bunch of people who own sheep and goats and an extension agent. And we said, how do we want to do this? Well, we want to meet once a month to teach each other things about how to do veterinary care for our animals. And we've been at it 5 years now. And so usually we have 10 educational meetups per year and then 1 planning meeting. And we take December off. And if someone in our network knows how to teach the topic we want to learn, we'll engage each other. And if nobody in our network knows, OSU will send a vet tech teacher to us. So that's our land grant university, Oregon State University. So we are supported by our extension service and our land grant university. And for people who don't know what that is, it's really cool and you should look into it. But the extension service has a mission of providing science-based education to the public on things like animal husbandry and veterinary care and forest management. And
Is that nationwide?
yes, safe
What's
canning.
it called?
It's called the extension service.
Okay.
Every state has at least 1 land grant university, and that means they were given land by the federal government. The land was, of course, stolen by Native people.
Yeah.
But they were given land in exchange for a public mission to educate the public for low or no cost. So you can go to your land grant university or call your extension service and say, what do you teach? What's available in my area? And in my area, you can go to classes on having worm bins in your kitchen, or how to compost, or common plant pathogens in an orchard.
That's a great resource. So can you not only go there, but they will, if you have your own group, they will help you if
it
they
depends.
can?
If they can, they will. Yeah,
Mhm.
if they can, they will. And if it falls under their service mission, they will.
Yeah. I don't know why I know. Yeah, that's such a great idea. Just form a group of people that want to learn something, teach each other, and bring in outside experts. It
Yeah.
sounds so basic now that I'm saying it out loud, but when I read about it, I'm like, oh, wow, that can be applied to anything. And that is one way that we can all start forming physical communities.
Yes, exactly.
Getting to know each other and our neighbors again.
Yes. Yes.
Great.
So I'll just tell you one story that I had a sheep who gave birth, and she had a serious birth emergency. And I called my vet. I do have a vet. He just lives an hour away. He comes once a year to do a herd health check and sell me prescription medications. But I called my vet, but it was a holiday weekend and he didn't get back to me for 5 days.
Right.
So here I am with this birth emergency that's imminent. And I send an email to the Small Ruminant Networks listserv, and I got 4 responses within 20 minutes, including somebody who was like, have you tried putting your hand in there to see if there's more babies or if she's got something else going on? And, so I know it's my responsibility what I do with my animals. If I take the advice of my Small Ruminant Network people, nobody's liable but me. Right.
Right.
So I washed my arm up to the elbow and stuck it in this sheep and felt around in there, and there were no more babies. So that's great. But some big blood clots came out. And then I gave her a shot of Pitocin and a shot of antibiotics because I had introduced bacteria with my arm, and she fully recovered. So, so here I was, like, I had these medications on hand in part because I had this network helping me learn which medications I might need to have on hand in case of an emergency. And then I had asked my vet, these are medications I need to have on hand. So I had them in the refrigerator in the barn, just one dose of each. But that I saved this sheep's life because of my network and my ability to ask them for help in a situation like that. And then I had somebody who lived about 15 minutes away from me put on the small ruminant listserv, I have a lamb who just won't suckle. Does anyone know how to tube feed a lamb? And tube feeding it's kind of a scary thing to do because you put a tube down into their stomachs and then pour the milk in because they're not suckling. But if you have a newborn lamb that needs this, you usually only have to do it once, because once they get some food in their stomachs, it's really colostrum, it's the first food. It helps them get warmer. It kind of perks them up and they get some blood sugar going, and they kind of, it's almost miraculous. They go from like, oh my God, this lamb is going to die, to standing on their feet, making noises, trying to suckle. So I had just learned to tube feed lambs, and I drove over to this woman's farm and tube fed her lamb and saved him.
Fabulous stories. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess one could say where the rubber hits the road, although that's not exactly um, a rural statement. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it is.
You do what you
Um,
have to do, my mom would say.
right. You teach courses where, and I think it's permaculture, or tell us more. Where are you teaching? What are you teaching? How do I
Well,
sign up? Whatever.
okay, well, I am hyper local, so my classes tend to be in person, and they're in the Eugene area. I say within an hour's drive of Eugene, because sometimes we go to rural places around Eugene to teach classes. And I have an email newsletter where I put out class announcements. So if people are close enough, sometimes people drive down from Portland. It's about 2.5 hour drive. If people are close enough to want to drive to my classes, you can
Can you
get on.
tell us the email so that somebody just might be interested in knowing?
Yes. So probably the best way to get on my newsletter is actually to go to my Substack. And
Okay, Substack lives. There we go.
yes, so I do publish an article every week on Substack, and I recommend people go there because that's a way to get my education without having to come to my classes. But then if you
Right.
comment on Substack and say, "Hey, I really want to be on your newsletter," then I'll contact you and say, "Great, where do you live? What's your email address?" and put you on my newsletter.
What's the name of your
So,
Substack?
KaraHuntermoon.substack.com.
so just an interesting connection there. We're talking about, I think it was liberation listening, I think was the phrase that you had used, but how to bring these worlds together. And this is a very pressing issue for our reality, right? Um, but here you are, um, nursing animals back to health and slaughtering others as necessary in appropriate ways, and on Substack. So isn't that an interesting combination? And it's a way, because one of the question I was feeling when you were talking earlier about this set of different ways of approaching reality is, where do we find some common ground? And my and I'm not suggesting necessarily that Substack, but I am seeing there is a connection here that's happening in some kind of, dare I say, organic way. Um, but what is your inkling, or what is your intuition um, around this liberation listening, and how do we find the space, the way, the entry into conversation that allows us to move beyond the places where we've decided we all disagree and we're all on the other side of whatever we're supposed to be on the other side of? How do we move that? Have you experienced that? Have an inkling around that? What's your what's your wisdom source saying about that?
Well, it's called liberation listening for a reason, and it's because we focus on listening. And some of the things I've said in this interview that might be a little controversial come from listening to people with enough respect to try to hear what they mean and not just what they say.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's easy, because when someone says something, it's so easy to interpret it as an attachment rupture, let's call it. You know, like someone says something and you hear, oh, you don't belong to my group, so I don't have to listen to you because you have the wrong ideas about things. And it can feel very threatening to listen to someone who doesn't belong to your group, whatever that group is. And so the other part of liberation listening is, how do you update your nervous system to today's reality and realize that you're not actually being threatened when someone disagrees with you. Just because they don't belong to your group politically or otherwise, it doesn't mean that they're going to hurt you. Right? So we do a practice in liberation listening where, let me back up a little. Liberation listening is my social permaculture offering. So I teach this, and
It's your social, political,
my social permaculture offering.
it's your social permaculture offering. Okay.
So permaculture is asking the question, how can we live sustainably forever and ever? And social permaculture says, how can we live sustainably forever and ever together?
Got it.
Right. So how do we do this? Because we're not going to do it alone. And liberation listening is the name of my social permaculture educational offering. It's something that I've been teaching for 10 years. And there's two parts to that. One part is learning to listen, and the other part is getting out of our own way so we can listen.
Mhm.
And that part means other people listen to us, so we can explore all of the stuff that comes up in our emotional state, in our nervous system, that gets in the way of us being able to address present reality and connect with the people that are in our present reality.
Can you give me an example?
I had a neighbor, he's dead now, but he was a Vietnam War veteran and a long time alcoholic. He was sober when I met him, but quite a violent man in terms of having a very bad temper, and sexist, racist, homophobic, all the things,
All the things you love, right? Yeah.
all the things that I do not love. And he also was a really excellent neighbor. He would come over just to check on us. He would come over to be sociable and connect. When my husband left the country to visit relatives and I was pregnant, he would come over to see if I was okay without my husband here. He knew all the plants and animals and the mushrooms. He would kill the non-native birds and feed the native birds and then video record them. And he knew a tremendous amount about birds. We had all these rare native birds because of what he did to affect the bird population in the neighborhood. And he also owned a business doing tree work, and he mentored my husband into starting his own business doing tree work. Yeah. So what am I going to focus on? Am I going to focus on the fact that I don't feel safe leaving my kids alone in his presence because he might say something that I find egregious? Or am I going to focus on what an incredible neighbor he is and what a gift he is to us, to our family, to our community? And that's work. I have to tell you, people I live with would run when they saw him coming. They did not want to listen to his BS.
Was that largely because of the fear of his anger?
No, I think it was largely because he would talk in very homophobic and sexist,
Unacceptable ways, right?
He would talk in ways that we just found horrible. It was hard to listen to. It was hard to know how to interrupt him. One time I was whispering in my husband's ear, "How do you stop him?" And he just turned to my neighbor Tom and he said, "Tom, how does one make you shut up?" And then my neighbor said, "Well, just tell me to shut up." And I said, "Okay, Tom, shut up." He was okay with that. He could handle that. And near the end of his life, he wanted to know. He would ask me honestly, "Do you think what I just said was racist?" He would honestly ask me and want an answer from me, or like he once wrote this rap poem about, this is a horrible story. He would go to the coffee shack and read poetry to the women working in the coffee shack. Sexual sexist poetry. And of course, they're at work. So they're sitting there like laughing nervously
They,
because they can't be rude to a
they
customer,
can't go anywhere. Right.
right?
Right.
So he comes in my house and he's like, listen to this one I wrote. I just wrote this one. And he starts reading it to me. And I'm like, Tom, I can't listen. I'm sorry. It's too sexist. I just can't listen. And he says, well, how am I being sexist? I thought I was honoring women. Explain it to me.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
we had enough connection that he actually wanted to know what I thought, because I spent most of our relationship trying to notice how he benefited my life, being a good neighbor, thinking about my obligation to him as a neighbor. How do I be a good neighbor? How do I listen? Okay, now I've gotten to the maximum capacity. I can't listen anymore. Where do I go get someone to listen to me so I can vent about how hard it is to listen to this guy? Right? So that's where the listening comes in, that you have to figure out who listens to me when I've reached my capacity, so I can clear some of this stuff out and increase my capacity to connect with other people.
Right.
Yeah, that's a
Right.
good point. The only way really to be heard is to listen in many ways. You have to form that connection and build that trust.
Right, because just like when they say something sexist, racist, we shut down and can't listen to them. We say things that they hear as indications that they shouldn't listen to us because we don't belong to their group.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we get past that divide so we can at least belong together as neighbors
Mhm.
and get to the point where we care about what the other person says?
Mhm. Yeah. It's so extreme right now. The barriers we're putting up between ourselves, our in-group and out-group, othering people that don't think exactly like we do.
Right.
So we just won't listen to them.
Right.
I'm guessing that our time is coming close here, but I'm hearing I'm hearing there is there's a common humanity here. There's a common humanity. And maybe it comes through sharing stories. Maybe it comes through um, from suffering. Maybe it does come from deep listening. Um, maybe it comes from recognizing that uh, I might think I'm from this tribe, and you may think you're from that tribe, but we are all actually human beings. And uh, it takes a long time to get to that space when you can kind of go underneath what's happening,
Yes.
and feel the heart. Uh, and I love that he says to you, "Oh, am I being sexist?" It now you know maybe he's just pulling my leg, but maybe he doesn't know that. Maybe he
I think he
honestly
didn't know.
does not know that.
He didn't know.
And so that to me is to hold that. He actually didn't know that.
Hmm.
That's remarkable. And that's a space right there for connection. So I find that uh, encouraging, actually. But you got to be enough in the conversation to be able to go back and forth like you are in order for that to happen. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, Kara, I think our time is about up. I want to respect your time and really thank you for being with us this morning. This has been really eye-opening for me, and I'm sure for a lot of our listeners. And I love the work you're doing. You've already shared your website, Substack, Kara Huntermoon. And so I wanted to see if you had a quote or a poem or something you'd like to share with us as we close
Yeah.
out.
Has somebody already done Mary Oliver's Wild Geese on your show?
No, I don't think so.
All right, this is Mary Oliver. I have Mary Oliver's Devotions, which is the selected poems of Mary Oliver, and I read a poem from this book almost every day before starting the farm work with my students. And
Mhm.
usually a different poem each day. I don't run out, they're all good. But
Yeah, yeah.
this is one of her most famous, Wild Geese.
Mhm.
You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
Mm. You're muted, Bernice. That's one of my favorites, Mary Oliver. She's a treasure.
Yeah.
It's really been a pleasure to be with you, and I'm looking forward to another conversation. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Thank you, Kara. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
With deep respect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.